Hello Gates. Burt Reynolds didn't talk about Clint Walker much during his lifetime. In Hollywood, silence usually means one of two things: either there's bad blood, or there's something too personal to put into words. When Reynolds finally opened up, what he said shocked fans who thought they knew everything about his ego, his stardom, and his grudges. Turns out, Clint Walker, the quiet, mountain-sized cowboy from Cheyenne, wasn't just another actor Burt crossed paths with. He was the man Reynolds once called the kind of hero every kid wanted to be, and every actor wanted to beat. Now, that's a bold statement coming from Burt Reynolds, who built an entire career out of playing heroes and outlaws no one could touch. But when he said that about Clint Walker, people started to realize there was more admiration than rivalry there. And what's wild is, this story begins way before fame, money, or movie sets, back when both men were just trying to prove they belonged in a town that chews up even the toughest. This story isn't just Hollywood gossip, it's a lesson about pride, masculinity, and what it means when two alpha legends realize they've got more in common than they ever admitted. And somewhere in that tension, between respect and rivalry, Reynolds found himself admitting something most people never expected, that Clint Walker scared him, not because of what he did, but because of what he represented. Let's rewind to the late 1950s. Clint Walker had just become a household name thanks to Cheyenne, one of TV's first big Western hits. 6'6", shoulders like a barn door, and a voice that could calm a stampede. Walker was the definition of old-school heroism. No scandals, no trash talk, no Hollywood drama. He was pure grit and decency, something rare even back then. Burt Reynolds, on the other hand, was just getting started. He'd done a few westerns, a few TV appearances, but he wasn't yet the megastar we'd see in Smokey and the Bandit or Deliverance. He was struggling to break through, constantly being told, "You're too much of a pretty boy to play the tough guy." Ironically, that's exactly what made him admire Clint Walker, because Clint didn't have to act tough. He just was. Reynolds once told a friend, "You could feel the room change when Clint walked in." It wasn't fear. It was respect and a little bit of jealousy. That confession set the tone for how Burt saw Clint for decades, the kind of presence he could never quite replicate, no matter how many hit movies he made. The first time they met was on a Warner Brothers backlit. Burt, still grinding through small TV roles, saw Clint finishing a scene from Cheyenne. Clint had just finished tossing a stuntman over a table, a real stunt, no doubles, and everyone was applauding. Burt, being the bold guy he was, joked, "Hey, save some of that table for the rest of us." Clint just smiled and said, "You're welcome to try next time." Years later, when Reynolds became a superstar, interviewers asked if he ever felt intimidated by anyone in Hollywood. He laughed and said, "Only once, and it wasn't John Wayne. It was Clint Walker." The guy made John Wayne look like his sidekick. And he meant it. Burt admired the way Clint carried himself, quiet, disciplined, no scandals. In an era when everyone was chasing headlines, Clint Walker was just solid. The kind of man whose handshake meant something. Reynolds once joked, if Clint Walker shook your hand, you'd check afterward to make sure your shoulder was still attached. It's fascinating how their careers mirrored each other in strange ways. Clint was the classic cowboy hero, rugged, moral, strong, but not flashy. Burt was the opposite, flashy, fast-talking, and constantly teasing Hollywood's obsession with itself. Yet both men represented a kind of masculinity that doesn't really exist anymore. Real toughness. No need to prove it with Instagram quotes or PR stunts. What's wild is that behind that tough image, Burt admitted he felt insecure next to Clint. He had that natural hero thing, Reynolds said. "You can't fake that. I could play 100 heroes and still not touch what he did just by being himself." But here's where things get interesting. There was a period in the 1960s when both men's careers hit a strange crossroads. Clint Walker nearly lost his life in a freak accident. He fell off a ski lift, was impaled by a pole, and was declared dead before miraculously surviving. Doctors said he'd never work again. But within months, he was back in front of the camera. When Burt heard about that, he reportedly said, "That's the difference between him and me. I'd still be in the hospital asking for sympathy." It was a joke, but behind it was real admiration. He couldn't understand how someone could go through something that brutal and come back tougher than ever. Fast forward to Burt's later years. During one of his final interviews, when asked about actors he respected most, he surprised everyone. Instead of mentioning big names like Eastwood or Newman, he said, "Clint Walker." because he never let Hollywood change who he was. Then he added, and because he did what I couldn't, he stayed pure. That statement hit fans hard. Coming from Reynolds, the man who openly joked about his ego, his divorces, his regrets, it was almost confessional. He wasn't just praising Clint Walker's career. He was admitting that beneath all the stardom, there was envy. Not of fame, but of peace. Clint Walker was never obsessed with fame. He turned down projects that didn't fit his moral compass. He refused to play villains who glorified violence without reason. Burt, on the other hand, once admitted, "I said yes to too many things for the paycheck." That contrast haunted him later in life. Clint didn't chase Hollywood, Reynolds said. Hollywood chased him, and that's how I knew he was the real deal. One of the funniest stories Reynolds told about Walker happened at a charity event. Clint, towering over everyone, accidentally blocked the buffet table. Burt quipped, "Clint, move over, some of us need to see the food to feel brave enough to eat it." Clint smiled and said, "Reynolds, if you stop talking, there'll be enough food for everyone." The crowd erupted. Two alpha legends, joking like schoolboys, that's how much respect there was between them. When Burt Reynolds finally opened up about Clint Walker, it wasn't to expose gossip or brag about their encounters. It was something deeper, a rare moment of humility from a man who'd built his life on confidence. "You can measure a man by how he treats people when the cameras aren't rolling," Burt said. And Clint Walker never needed cameras to prove he was a good man. That's what makes this story unforgettable. It's not about Hollywood power, fame, or rivalry. It's about two men who, in very different ways, defined what strength really meant, one with his charm and humor, the other with his quiet integrity. So before you go chasing what everyone else thinks makes you successful, think about this. Burt Reynolds had everything: money, fame, adoration, but what he envied most was something money can't buy. The kind of peace that comes from knowing who you are when nobody's watching. That's the real legacy of Clint Walker, and maybe the lesson Burt Reynolds wanted us all to learn.